Hey, here we are again. Time to paint the chart. So get your brushes ready, get some clean water, have your plate and your colors ready, a cloth, your paper, and the reference images. And we can start going. So first we ought to determine the lightest color of your subject, which is for the chart visible in the screen that you have in front of you right now. So looking at the stem, for example, the red stem, you see that the part which catches most light is actually more of a light pink color. So that's a good color for your base layer. Then if you were to look at the big leaf in the top, you see very clear highlight. It's super light. It's not the same color as white, but it approaches white. So to me, it's more of a very light color green. And at the bottom of the same leaf, you see this very luminescent, warm green color, which is more of a yellowish green. And those are more or less the lightest colors that you can see in the chart. And these we will choose for our base layer. So let's get painting. To start with the lightest colors of the green that we just determined, we wet our brush, and obviously we start off with the green by making a mixture between yellow and blue. So I reactivate some of the yellow and some of the blue. To see if it mixes a color that I like. Don't be afraid, it doesn't have to be too precise. I think this color will do. And you can always use your test paper to see how it turns out. Don't forget to also remove some of the paint in your brush by flicking it in the water and drying it, and see what happens if you have a more diluted version of your color. Oftentimes that approaches the real good color for your base layer. In this case, we paint around the veins because the veins have a significant other color, the reddish pink color. So give it a go, and in the places where the highlight has been indicated, for example here, be sure that this place doesn't turn out to become too dark. It's always good to just re-wet your brush and drag the paint that is on the paper along. Better too light than too dark. My tip is to work segment by segment, and here segments are mainly determined by the vein. So I can continue until here. This is where one segment ends. Then what I just did is still a little bit wet. If I were to look at my reference image, I could see where there are darker and lighter places. In the darker places, we would like to add some additional saturated paint. Removing some of the paint, we do by cleaning our brush and drying it almost entirely. Then we simply go over the paint and lift some off. At times you might want to wet the paper a little bit before you lift off some of the color. And you do this in the places where you think that the highlight is even lighter than the color that you just put on, but not entirely white. So the benefit of this technique is that you have a highlight that is very light compared to the rest of your work, but not the same color as the paper. There is some color on it. So, like that. And in the places where you do see some extra, some additional darkness, simply go in onto your wet paper. If it's dried already, re-wet it with just water. And add some extra paint. Let it simply do its work and spread where it wants to go. So I might zoom in for you a little. See how much variation is already showing. Let's continue and do these. Be sure not to work too dark. So on the right side of the leaf, we worked wet on dry. The paper was dry and we added a wet brush. Let's try to work wet on the left side of the paper. So working wet and wet starts by having a clean brush filled with only water. Make sure it's not too wet. Better too dry than too wet. You can always add water, you cannot remove it easily. And we start by painting the entire area that we want covered in the green. Be sure to paint around the main veins. Find a good paste that works for you, that allows for the paper to still be slightly wet once you are fully done and it's time to add the green. If you work a little slower than I do, just add some more water to your brush so you can tell the paper is still wet by looking at a shine. This is perfect, just a light shine. Then go in with your green and add the color. You could already look at the variations of dark and light and start by adding the most saturated pigment in the places that have the darkest color. So for me, it's the places that I'm just doing right now. What you can do now is clean your brush and have mainly water on it, and then drag the paint that you put on it, drag it along the rest of the area you want to cover. Keep in mind your highlights. That is where you want to have least color. And keep in mind your pigmented areas. That's where you do not want to pull off too much color. Like this works for me. So, once the green of your chart has dried, it's time to continue with the red and pink colors. Just take a small look at the reference image again to see where the lightest colors are and where the darker tones are. A very diluted version of your red will already show up as pink. See, the further you dilute it, the closer it comes to actually a real good color pink. So let's give it a go and cover the veins. Don't forget to work in segments. So this here at the bottom, this little end of the stem, is one segment. This is one, and this is another one. If you start too dark, it's important to simply clean your brush and drag the color that you put on there, drag it further along your area that you want to cover. You see that closer to the top, the color of the veins is much more saturated, so you can go ahead and add some extra red. It's also interesting to look at how the plant actually has its veins. Like, how do they reach the main stem? Under what angle? So they actually turn down towards the main stem. And if you think that you already dare to add some extra color to the places that show more saturation, go ahead and do so. Don't overdo it. The main color will be put on in the next layers. You only start by painting an adjacent segment when the segments around it are dry. So we can tell that the lowest side of this stem is obviously quite a lot darker. Then we forgot this segment. If you look very closely at the reference image, you can tell that even this segment is made up of 2 segments. There is this little bend right here.